So, in general, the criticism of the What's New era of Scooby-Doo, and in particular its movies, is their relative blandness. Unfortunately, I can't say I really disagree with this assessment. I mean, they introduced the world to Del, and I mean, like, who doesn't like Del? Also, they made Pirates Ahoy, which is a wild movie that I greatly enjoy just for how little sense it makes. But yeah, in general, I would say that these movies just sort of feel like longer episodes with a lot of padding. But, say what you want about Scooby-Doo and the Samurai Sword. At the very least...
Eh? The Sword of Doom? But how?
Like, we'll tell you later. Right now, we've got a serious case of the robot ninjas.
You can't say this movie's bland.
I shall be with you always, guiding the sword from within.
Honestly, I feel a little bit intimidated by this movie now. In my memory, this movie had significantly more thematic meat on its bones than your typical Do adventure, which is why I wanted to analyze it. But having just rewatched it earlier this evening, I'm taken more than a little off guard. Not for the record, because there isn't thematic material to dig into. We shall get to that in time. But this movie, just, okay. I have thoughts. I have many thoughts, and I need to share them. Scooby-Doo and the Samurai Sword is the last in the What's New era of animation, as well as the final time Casey Kasem would ever voice Shaggy. He did do voice work for the series in Get a Clue and Mystery Incorporated, but this was his swan song for the iconic character he helped to make so famous. It was also a sister production with The Goblin King, which is far more upfront with its weirdness, which ultimately makes it a much more boring film. The Legend of the Black Samurai is based on the actual legend of Muramasa and Masamui from Japanese folklore, although it takes extreme liberties. In the original tale, there are two blacksmiths, and one, being the apprentice, manages to make an evil sword, whereas the master makes a holy sword. But everything involving the Green Dragon is completely made up for the movie. Okay, well that's enough trivia. Let's crack open this bad boy and get things started. So, they sure did decide to make the most prominent feature of this cover the bottom of Shaggy's foot. Well, I'm not here to judge. And this is how they decided to make the disc look. Well, clearly someone let the fetish artist design the promotional art for your Scooby-Doo movie, but hey, I ain't here to judge. Let's get this thing started! So, like, is this movie any good? So, it's not great. Maybe that's a little harsh. It's certainly not boring. For a Western straight-to-video movie, it's got some impressive fight animation. It moves at a breakneck pace, and of course Fred is absolutely fantastic in this movie.
Just stay calm and let me do all the talking. Hello there. We're from America.
Look! It's Shaggy and Scooby!
Ow, my neck.
Zoinks!
Jeepers! Jinkies!
Dang, I still don't have a catchphrase.
This is not a complete disaster of a film. Maybe it's a little light in logic, but it's not full of plot holes. But on the other hand, if I had to guess, This movie had maybe 1 or 2 drafts and then was never revised again. My reason for thinking this is largely to do with how clunky the transitions between plot beats are. For example, in the transition between the first and second act, we have a quick little scene where the cast has a scroll as a clue as to where they need to travel to next. It's very Indiana Jones, National Treasures, Uncharted stuff, and the solution to the puzzle is they need to use origami to turn the scroll into a paper dragon, which rearranges the words of the riddle to now give the location for the next part of the story. This is fine. It's unique, as puzzles go, although admittedly it was clearly written in English with zero understanding of how this would have worked in Japanese with Japanese characters, which would fundamentally change how the sentence structure of this clue worked. But really, that's just a nitpick. The scene, as an outline, it's fine, but the execution's a little sloppy. The way they come to the conclusion that they need to fold the paper into a dragon is that Shaky is really good at origami and is doing it right there. It's already a hobby for him. As a character detail, that's great. Shaky has a long history of having mostly random skills that inevitably turn out to be useful. I love this for him. It's a great bit of character writing. But how about in this movie? When is Shaky's amazing origami skills introduced?
The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step?
The paper dragon shows the way.
I've got it! Like, check it out, Scoob. An origami octopus.
About 20 seconds after they read the riddle. I don't even know where he got this paper from. He was cowering in the previous shot he appeared in. This isn't like a big deal. It's just kind of lazy writing. Like, clearly they got to this scene and realized that they needed to introduce origami now that it had become relevant to the story. That's pretty standard for a first draft. Like, integrating setup and foreshadowing for later parts of the movie is really something you should only be doing in the second and third draft. But that they never did introduce origami into an earlier part of the movie before it becomes relevant to the plot, I think is very telling. It's not like it would have been hard for them to introduce it earlier. Take this scene where they're flying around Tokyo in a computer-operated jet experiencing culture shock in the opening scenes. It would have been so easy to have a quick little scene where Shaky picks up an origami book and goes, "Like zoinks, man, what a crazy picture book. This doesn't look like a swan, it's just a bunch of lines." And Velma is like, "That's because it's an origami pattern. The ancient Japanese art of paper folding. You fold on the lines to create animals." Wow, can you believe I'm not a professional voice actor? That was so good. Not that my hypothetical hastily written rewrite is amazing by any means. It's not. But it's more there to demonstrate that including a setup for Shaggy's origami skills before it became relevant, it would have been very easy to do with no major restructuring to the movie required. But they just didn't do that. And that's really the point I'm trying to get across. It's not that this movie's incomprehensible. Each plot point follows logically enough from the previous one. It's just that the connective tissue between each plot beat is tenuous at best, and in general, we just go from plot beat to plot beat in the laziest ways possible. A more blatant example would be later in the movie when Shaky and Scooby are on the run, and just happen to go into a restaurant run by a samurai who can train them and takes them to the Green Dragon purely because they landed in front of his shop. Again, not a plot hole as much as a gigantic plot convenience. But on the bright side, the restaurant owner is possibly my favorite one-time appearance character in Scooby-Doo. From his perspective, a guy and a dog come into his restaurant, compliment his cooking, engage in some light conversation about folklore, then ninjas break down his store window wielding weapons, and the guy is like, "Oh no! The robot ninjas are after the Sword of Doom!" A historical and mythical weapon, and his first and only response is this.
Robot ninjas?
Now we will have some fun!
No questions asked, and he took the robot ninja thing in his stride based on how readily he slices his head open. So yeah, great character. Absolute king behavior. Another weird thing about this movie is that it very much feels like it's setting up to be a Daphne movie. The gang is invited to Japan so she can enter a martial arts contest. The first act sets up a rivalry between Sojo, her, and Miss Miyamoto, making her fight her best friend, Mayumi. Then she loses, not due to lack of skill, but unwillingness to fight underhandedly. And then Miss Miyamoto comments, calling her talented but undisciplined. In a more traditional movie, where things are foreshadowed, this would probably be concluded by Daphne proving herself and bringing her friend to the light side by fighting them one more time. Then, when the character tries to win through some underhanded way, Daphne is then able to prove herself by winning in an honorable way. Then make some speech about how there's value to friendship or honor or the heart of the card. You know, typical anime stuff. But Samurai Sword is not so easily predicted.
Ninja robots! Double cool! Sorry, I geeked out there for a sec.
Instead, about 50 minutes into the movie, they catch the ghost, revealing that it was Sojo under the instructions of Miss Miyamoto, in order to draw Mystery Incorporated in to have them find the historical artifact, which serves as a prison to the real version of the monster. Why yes, movie, I liked Witch's Ghost too. Still, might I ask why you chose to remake it in Japan? And then the movie gets bored with the whole Daphne plotline and instead veers hard left, with Shaggy and Scooby on the run to find their green dragon and achieve enlightenment. Well, Miss Miyamoto wants to take over the world!
Once the Black Samurai has returned, I will order him to lead my robot ninjas against the ignorant forces of this modern age. Then the ancient world of the samurai and the new world of technology shall exist in perfect harmony.
Good work.
This transition is absolutely as abrupt as I'm saying here, and I kind of love how ballsy it is for that. But on the other hand, I'm kind of sad that they dropped Daphne so completely in the last act. Instead of being able to have a final confrontation with her antagonist, where she proves her philosophical ideology in an active way, and then brings her friend back to the good guys through this act, she instead just kind of gets this one line.
But if you do things that a winner wouldn't do, that automatically makes you a loser. Hi-ya!
Gee, Daphne, doing bad stuff is bad? I never would have thought of that before. Thanks. So yeah, if I haven't made it clear, this movie is abrupt in its storytelling. It completely changes from a tournament film to a treasure hunting film to an action movie with very little warning, which makes it wildly unpredictable in a fun way, but also means most of the stuff that is set up in the first act is left feeling almost forgotten by the end. I would call this a deeply inconsistent movie, which probably has about 3 times as much story as they really have time to develop. But having too much ground to cover and having too many ideas is a nice change of pace from the earlier What's New movies, which struggled to meet the unimpressive hour and 15-minute runtime. This movie is fun. It's constantly moving. Overall, I'd be willing to shrug my shoulders, say, kids movie, and move on. If it weren't for one other problem. So, fun fact. And by fun, I mean depressing. Scooby-Doo has a very bad history of dealing with Asian cultures.
Welcome to Shag's and Scooby's Haunted Chinese Restaurant, the place where the ghosts eat the most.
And as you might have noticed, this movie takes place in Japan. I don't think I get to make definitive statements about what's good or bad representation, what is or isn't an accurate depiction of a country I've never been to, or act as an authority about Japan in any way, shape, or form. So please keep that all in mind in the next section of the video. But I'm still going to attempt to talk about this because I feel like the video would be incomplete without it. Well, let's start with the positives. Firstly, the casting. With the exception of Sojo, every Asian character is played by an Asian actor. And none of them are voiced by white people. So yeah, bare minimum. But also on the other hand, still better than most of Hollywood. In general, I wouldn't say this is a particularly mean-spirited depiction of Japan. It has scenes where they ooh and awe about how advanced the tech is, and they make the joke about how everything is available in vending machines in Japan. But these are just the standard culture shock jokes you would expect whenever the Scooby Gang is in a new country. In general, there is a sense of respect towards what is shown, but this depiction of Japan is rather flanderized and simplified. It seems like the writer just had a list of Japanese things he had heard of and jammed as many of them as possible into this movie. This is a very simplified and stereotyped depiction of Japan, which is disappointing. There's also the music. The instrumental stuff is decent with a couple of memorable pieces. But during the chase scenes, we're forced to listen to this music.
You can learn to dance if you only try. Come on, girls, don't be shy. Everybody's doing the samurai. Follow me. I will show you. I am sorry. I cannot help you. You are very nice.
That I think was attempting to sound Japanese. Yeah, it's pretty bad. I'm not gonna stand here and complain that the Asian characters aren't well developed, rounded characters, as if that should be expected of this movie. Because this is Scooby-Doo. This movie is hardly an in-depth character study. I can let that slide. But I will comment that Sojo feels a little tropey, and the shopkeep, as fun as he is, also leans real heavy into the thankfully mostly dead trope of every Japanese character either being a martial artist or a wise old mystic. But that's just when they're in Japan. They also go to a Pacific island, and this section of the movie is terrible. How was this seen as okay in 2009? This feels like it's out of Gilligan's Island, and very much not in a good way. I don't think I need to analyze this. The clips speak for themselves, and oof. So yeah, I guess in conclusion, this movie seems to be well-intentioned when it comes to its depiction of Japan, if a little bit simplistic with its depiction of it. And when it comes to depicting the South Islands,
Ooh, babonga!
I don't know what happened, but yikes. Okay, with all that out of the way, you're still probably wondering, yes, that's all well and good, but what is this movie trying to teach me? No, you weren't wondering that, because this is a Scooby-Doo movie, which normally don't have overly developed themes. You fool, you've underestimated. Joe Shikta? A credit to the title of author. Yes, I shitteth you not. This movie brings up and examines the ideas of honor and sentimentality towards the past, and how that can make us overlook the horrible things that happened then. This starts immediately, fittingly enough, in a museum in a conversation between an old gray-haired historian and a pink-haired youth. Takagawa determines the problem with Kenji, and by extension the youth is, as he puts it,
Too many distractions, no discipline, no respect for the old ways.
and takes Kenji to an exhibit which is the solution. He says it's the savior of the museum, but I feel we can more broadly read this exhibit as the solution to the problems Takagawa has observed in youth.
The most fearsome warlord in the history of Japan! Do you see what I am getting at, Kenji? This exhibit could save the museum!
So, theme established. The modern age is undisciplined, distracted, and they need to improve by looking to the past and respecting brave men from history. Also, we have shown the Black Samurai is a symbol of this forgotten past of honor and discipline. That he's a symbol is not yet important, but keep that in mind. We know exactly where Mr. Takagawa stands in relationship to the modern age. But, is he right? Well, Miss Miyamoto seems to think so. Her motivation is to bring back the Black Samurai back from the dead so she can rule the world in a more traditional and disciplined way. And remember, the Black Samurai is a symbol of respect for the old ways. So her motivation is quite literally to return things to the way they were. Miss Miyamoto clearly values respect, honor, and discipline quite highly. Her school is run on respect, and she is such a composed and successful person that she likely has to have had a great deal of discipline to become so. So that is a strong argument in favor of Mr. Takagawa's perspective. Not only does Miss Miyamoto agree with him, but has also demonstrated the effectiveness of this philosophy in a real-world environment. However, this movie does not leave her unchallenged. Miss Miyamoto finds her ideological opponent from an unexpected place, that of Norval Shaggy Rogers.
Someone who still cares for the old ways.
Yeah, like the good old days when people chased each other around with big swords. Pardon my saying so, but that puts the mental in sentimental.
Oh.
And okay, I know that Shaggy is not necessarily seen as a wise philosopher, but in a single line he manages to deconstruct Miss Miyamoto's philosophical perspective, comment on the danger of a general unquestioned adoration of the past, as well as working in a pun. It's all well and good to say discipline and training in the past were better, but in general, were things that great in the olden days? I don't want to be dismissive of current violence that happens around the world today. I'm not Steven Pinkerman. I don't think it's a good idea to shrug all that off or suggest that those problems will take care of themselves. But things are measurably less violent nowadays. And maybe we shouldn't idolize past horrible monsters just because they're skilled at combat. Oh, oops! How did all these American and English politicians end up here? We were talking about Japan! Silly me! And for the record, Shaggy is the correct perspective, at least according to the movie. Mr. Takagawa, in the 11th hour, renounces his blind devotion to the old ways and wishes to redeem himself by embracing a more modern approach.
I should not have been so critical of this modern age. If only I had one more chance, I would fight to save this world like a modern-day samurai.
Put a pin in this, as I want to explore how he goes about this in my section on how this movie views technology. Miss Miyamoto comes close to recognizing the correct way to appreciate the past in this scene.
I will order him to lead my robot ninjas against the ignorant forces of this modern age. Then the ancient world of the samurai and the new world of technology shall exist in perfect harmony.
Her failing in logic is that, despite what she says, this will not be a harmonious blend of past and present. It will merely be recreating the power structures of the past, except now with dangerous robots. In order to achieve harmony, one must first acknowledge the failings of the past. Ms. Miyamoto, for her part, is not given the chance to acknowledge that she was in the wrong. But everything that happens in the climax shows the folly in her thinking.
Foolish one. It is you who shall call me master.
Her romanticized idea of the past allowed her to believe that recreating the past in the modern day would lead her to be in power due to her skill and merit.
I will resurrect the Black Samurai from the Sword of Doom. Once I have freed his spirit, he will call me master.
failing to consider that in the past, things were violent, unfair, and sexist. Then there's Shaggy's journey as a character. Interestingly enough, he doesn't really have one. He and Scooby-Doo travel through Mystic Gates on their journey to the Green Dragon, but they don't need to become better warriors or become more disciplined. They're given a magical sword possessed by a dragon, allowing them to go toe-to-toe with the real Black Samurai and defeat him. And the reason this isn't a cop-out is because the movie rejects the idea that they ever needed to become stronger warriors through training. It sees little value in becoming a warrior. Violence to gain power is an unworthy goal. Shaggy and Scooby are able to beat the Black Samurai and achieve enlightenment, not through hard work and discipline, but through their inherent nature and Zen philosophy. They are a modern samurai, not through hard training, but through a peaceful perspective. So what? Old is bad and violent, new is inherently good and superior? No, it's not that simple. Shaggy does not wholeheartedly represent the rejection of tradition, nor is this film completely unwilling to criticize the modern world. That brings us to the movie's perspective on technology. I believe the specific distractions Mr. Takugawa is referring to is technology. Japan's lean into technology is brought up a few times throughout the film in a neutral observation, but technology as a force for harm is specifically called out 2 different times. Firstly, Miss Miyamoto's robot ninja army, which she uses to try and take over the world with, and second, far more explicitly in this scene, with the Green Dragon.
The Black Samurai is on the attack!
Impossible! Ages ago, the Sword of Doom was hidden away, protected by guardians of stone, high atop a secret mountain on a savage island, surrounded by an impenetrable fog.
Yeah, a funny story about that.
This is interesting because the plane is as bad of a neutral invention as you can ask for, but it has introduced new dangers into the world that simply would not have been a problem without said technology. I don't think this is a direct allegory for any particular problem. Finding the Sword of Doom in a previously unreachable area isn't a metaphor for carbon being released from the ice due to modern technology or something like that. Although, maybe it could be. Nah, that's stupid. It's more of a general observation about the unexpected hazards that new technology introduces. Tech is neither a force for good or evil. It is merely a tool that gives some people greater opportunities. The heroes of this movie also use technology, but they do so to save lives. And when Mr. Takugawa wants to be a modern samurai, he uses technology to create an EMP blast, short-circuiting the robot ninjas. Tech, as well as respect for the past, should both be treated with some caution and balance. Remember, the thing Shaggy calls out is sentimentalness to the past. But at the same time, in the final battle, he and Scooby-Doo seek wisdom from the ancient Green Dragon. The idea of the movie is not to wholeheartedly reject the past, or to completely depend on modern technology, but to strike a balance, to seek wisdom from the past, but keep things in perspective. Don't go forgetting all the bad things that happened back then. And to use modern technology, sure, but to remember, it is a tool that can be quite easily misused. To completely be dependent on one or the other will leave you incomplete. What is required is a gentle balance. So why dedicate a video to such a niche topic? I don't think the internet was exactly begging for hot takes on a 13-year-old mediocre Scooby-Doo movie. And you're right, but that's kind of what makes it interesting to me. Scooby-Doo is a very big franchise, which most people have heard of, and it releases a new movie yearly, so clearly enough people must be watching it for it to be worthwhile to do that. But in general, I don't think most people give these movies a second thought. There's so many of them, and after a while, they just sort of start to blend into the background. And I don't know, I think that's a little bit of a shame. I don't want you to come away from this video thinking, oh, Scooby-Doo and the Samurai Sword, that must be a great movie. Look at how long he talked about it. It's not a great movie. It's not even one of the better Scooby-Doo movies. But, I mean, it still did try to be unique. It could have so easily skated by just being generic. But it's not. It is not a generic Scooby-Doo movie. And if nothing else, I do appreciate it for that. Yes, this is a kids movie, and I don't think if you're an adult watching this, you're going to come away thinking, oh, that was a really radical message. But really, can you name a single other kids movie where the takeaway message is you should question your elders and you don't intrinsically owe the past your respect? If nothing else, the fact that that came from a Scooby-Doo movie made this movie worth talking about, at least for me.